Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kevin Moss, and I'm a policy advisor here at the Western Governors Association. Welcome to today's webinar on the COVID-19 pandemic and associated cybersecurity threats. As state agencies, school districts, healthcare facilities, and businesses have transitioned to remote work, distance learning, and telehealth solutions to minimize the spread of COVID-19, cybersecurity threats have greatly increased and evolved. These cyber attacks have attempted to gather citizens' private information and disrupt critical infrastructure operations, among other malicious goals. Our speakers today will highlight how their agencies or businesses are working to thwart cyber attacks at the federal, state, and local levels and across the private sector. We will begin with presentations from each speaker and then transition to a short moderated discussion and question and answer session. To send in questions, please use the chat box function on the left side of the screen and address them to the presenters. You may send the questions in at any point, and I will refer back to them towards the end of the presentation. Thank you again for tuning in, and at this point, I'll turn it over to Brian Ware, Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency for the Department of Homeland Security. Brian, take it away when you're ready.
Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for participating in this call today. I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to you from the nation's capital here. CISA, the Cyber Information Security Agency, is a relatively new agency in DHS, in the U.S. government, and we are charged really with being the nation's cyber network defense organization. So we don't do offensive cyber, we're not a law enforcement agency, but we are charged with defending the country from cyber threats. Most of that effort focused on the federal government, but we have a role in extending cybersecurity protection to state and local governments, tribal and territorial agencies, as well as critical infrastructure providers in the United States. So I run the cybersecurity part of CISA, and I just want to talk to you a little bit today about what we are seeing and what we're doing in relationship to COVID-19 and cybersecurity. And I'd say at a high level, there are kind of four major areas that I want to address. But in the way of background, to say all of the bad things that happen in cybersecurity way back in December and January are still happening today. There's really no diminished threats or risks. Criminals are still being criminals. Bad nation-state actors are still being bad nation-state actors. But what I want to draw out, in addition to that, are four things that we're seeing and that we're concerned about, four areas of risk. And the first of those are phishing scams and malicious websites associated with those phishing scams. So, this is, in a way, it's business as usual, primarily for criminal actors. Just the difference right now is that COVID-19 is the lure. It's the reason that it's the theming in that message that an employee may click on, or it's something related to our country's response to COVID-19. So it may be, phishing related to purchasing of personal protective equipment or tests or medicines, or spoofing of websites so that payments from the IRS, the surplus funds, can be intercepted. So we're seeing just a significant number of these. Just recently, we put out a product, an information product with the National Cybersecurity Center in UK that talked about. So it showed some email impersonating the Director General of the World Health Organization. So, these phishing attempts are used to try to, lure someone into downloading some malicious code, some malware that exploits their systems in some way. And so all of the bad actors have used these difficult times to take advantage of the public, to take advantage of businesses. The things that we have to do about that are the same things that we always have to do. It's just urging your employees to be vigilant, to be on the lookout for emails that look suspicious, to only go to trusted sources for information or for products, or updates revolving around COVID-19. So that's the kind of stuff I'm telling my parents. and my brother is in small business, is just look out for these phishing scams and malicious websites, things that may at first glance look authentic, but are not. The second big category of things that we're concerned about is, again, traditional and typical, just finding new life in these times, is ransomware or DDoS attacks that could disrupt operations. And again, what we're concerned about, we're very concerned about protecting our nation's ability to respond to the COVID virus. So we're concerned about hospitals, we're concerned about laboratories, we're concerned about pharmaceutical companies, we're concerned about emergency management agencies and so forth, and out into that critical infrastructure, the supply chain. And so in the healthcare sector in particular, from 2017 to 2019, 50% of ransomware attacks were targeted at that sector. And so, we know that there are security vulnerabilities that are still present there that have been exploited for some time for gain. And we know that in this period of time, hospitals may appear to malicious actors as attractive targets because with the sense of urgency and the protection of patients, they may be perceived to be more willing to pay the ransom, and so it makes it an attractive target, and one that, of course, continues to have that underlying vulnerability. And so, there are a whole host of measures that we want organizations to take place, more than I can go through on this call today. But at the end of the call, I'm going to direct you to a couple of resources on our website and elsewhere that you can take advantage of in that particular risk area or threat stream. The third one I want to touch on is based on classified information that, of course, I can't get into on this call, so I'm going to just kind of appeal to everyone's common sense that we are seeing a significant increase in espionage activities against vaccine research and development. So directed at pharmaceutical companies, directed at laboratories, directed at R&D centers in universities and elsewhere. Every country in the world has a national interest in getting that vaccine or antivirals or medication the soonest, the fastest, and should be expected to use all of their espionage resources to steal what they can from the United States. And so we are very concerned because it is a priority for this country to develop that vaccine. It's a priority for us to protect the companies and the research institutions in the United States. We published just this morning with our partners in the UK some information that kind of speaks to this, some of the indicators that we're seeing from threat adversaries. The FBI also published last week just kind of alerts to universities in particular and research personnel in particular. So we are seeing this activity on the classified side. Again, nations are always conducting espionage. Our adversaries, we've certainly spoken frequently about China in particular and their desire to steal intellectual property from the United States, to transfer that intellectual property to their industries. And here, I think the thing that is just recently the urgent priority for every country is the vaccine or antiviral research. And so in my areas of concern, that is a significant one for us right now. Fourth, the last and not the least, is really the targeting of teleworking environments. And I would say that, we know that many companies, many government agencies, and certainly many employees have been, our livelihoods, our work, our businesses have been impacted by COVID. That there are many businesses that can't operate at all because they require that close physical contact, and yet there are other companies that are working, largely, maybe a significant percentage of their employees are working from home, and working from home when they didn't used to work from home. And of course, our kids are distance learning from home, and we're communicating with friends and family from home. So the technologies that we use to to work and to learn and to listen from home are now obviously targets for malicious criminal actors, targets for espionage, and really just targets for bad actors to disrupt. So that's okay, and you can accept some of those things when you're just having a virtual happy hour with your friends and family. But in the work environment, we're very concerned about the implementation of good security measures, good security practices around the systems and the teleworking products that we're using. So those are ways that we configure those products. Some products have more security features than others, but also really the CIOs and CISOs have to do their jobs in a different way too. Many of the security systems that are set up to protect networks kind of count on a large number or amount of the staff to be on premises. When you remove that staff off premises, when the rest of the workforce is teleworking, maybe things as simple as security logs may not be as accessible outside of the environment as they may have been otherwise. You may have designed things to create security perimeters that then are challenging when you're outside of the on-premises network. So this is another area, and you've certainly seen, I'm sure everyone here has seen reports of things like Zoom bombing. The risks that we're seeing are not confined to any one particular product. But I want to pivot here to a few things that we're doing and a few resources that you can explore after this call today. So again, my agency, the Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency, we normally call it CISA for CISA. And so if you go to CISA.gov, there's a whole page of Corona resources. So inside of those Corona resources are guidelines for teleworking. We have a series of teleworking products that have already come out, but a number that will be coming out over the coming weeks. They're specific for each product that's in the marketplace. So how adversaries may be exploiting those vulnerabilities that are known within those, but most importantly, how to use them in the way that is the most secure, or how to configure them in the way that is the most secure. And so we encourage everyone to look at those resources. There's a whole host of additional publications there that get into one thing that I would encourage kind of broadly across the listeners here. We have a series of products that are about implementing best practices, or what we call the cyber essentials. So I mentioned that I can't get into all of the things that you need to do to reduce the risk of ransomware and so forth, but cyber essentials gets into those things like implementing multi-factor authentication, using strong passwords when you can't use multi-factor authentication. So cyber essentials you'll find on the website. But the last thing, and this is something I really want to encourage everyone that's listening to take advantage of, we regularly see adversaries take advantage of well-known vulnerabilities that have been present for a long time, but that have just escaped attention, that haven't been patched and haven't been, agencies maybe perhaps didn't realize those vulnerabilities were present. We have a free service that we offer that we call SaiHi, or SaiHi is short for cyber hygiene. It is a scanning service that doesn't put anything on your network. We scan only your IP addresses that are on the public internet, and we scan those and will provide to you a weekly report of open vulnerabilities, and we rank those for you so that we identify the ones that are the most critical, and we will provide help to help you to address and close those vulnerabilities. In particular, if you are in the public health, if you're working in this what I call the COVID response area, we know that we have adversaries that are targeting those and seeking to exploit vulnerabilities there. We want to encourage you to take us up on our offer to sign up for that SaiHi service. And that one, you can find it on our website as well, but it's as easy as sending an email to vulnerability@cisa.dhs.gov. So vulnerability@cisa.dhs.gov will go to an inbox, and someone from our team will respond to you in the same day and walk you through getting signed up and set up for SaiHi scanning. So that is all I will say for now, and we'll look forward to questions later in the program.
Great, thank you, Ryan. That was a really useful introductory overview and federal perspective. So now we're going to go to Sean Riley, who is the Chief Information Officer for the State of North Dakota's Information Technology Department. Sean, go ahead when you're ready.
Excellent, thank you. So very much appreciate everybody jumping on today. And on a personal note, I really appreciate being able to be here for this webinar, because this is one hour out of the day that I do not have to sit in COVID command center, which has been my standard place here for several weeks. So very much appreciate being invited here to speak with you today. So I want to give you a little bit of different perspective of things that are going on. I want to give you the on-ground perspective of where we are from a state aspect and what's been happening for the last several weeks. So let me start framing up the state of North Dakota a little bit. So in North Dakota, we have a different approach to cybersecurity than's been available for most other states. We actually have a strategic alignment between what we lovingly call all 7 branches of government. And that means strategically, we at the shared service within the North Dakota Information Technology Organization have the cybersecurity team that defends the entirety of the executive branch, judicial branch, legislative branch, all K-12, all higher ed, all cities, all counties. Now, in normal circumstances, that's an awesome thing. But the unfortunate part for us is that we just got that legislation approved and just had that authority applied to us in July of last year. So we are not even a year into implementing a new comprehensive technology platform and implementing assessments across the entirety of the state. So right now, we have about 250,000 people that sit in our environment on a day-over-day basis that we defend on a moment-to-moment concept. And we have approximately 90% of the executive branch is on one technology platform for defense, and that is primarily our Palo Alto technologies. And so we use basically everything that Palo makes, from Cortex and XDR and Traps and Global Connect, et cetera, et cetera. And we use that technology in a uniform way across those organizations. Now, we are still very much in the early phases of rolling that technology out to other organizations, especially the K-12, higher ed side, and then all of those government entities around the state. So when you look at the comprehensive nature of the state, here in North Dakota, we have approximately 2,200 different governments. And when you think of that, that's townships and counties and cities and K-12 and universities, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those governments have had whatever their cyber model was before, and now we're all moving towards this much more uniform structure across the board. And I will tell you, the fun part of this is that one of the things that we have found is that we have been able to put forth visibility into the network before everybody started moving home. Before we started doing mass telework, we took about 8,000 people out of the executive branch, moved them home in about 48 hours. We moved most of the rest of the state over the period of a week. So about 250,000 people that ended up moving from on-premise work into telework services in a very short amount of time. And one of the things that we were able to get in place across the board was network visibility. So we'll give you an idea of what we've been seeing. What we have been seeing now is all of these workers who started going home, plugging into their home networks, have some really bad cybersecurity in their home networks. We're seeing all sorts of horizontal attacking from inside their own private network. We found that one ISP in the state hands out modems for cable modem connection, but there's no firewalls on those modems. We had about 70 staff. Luckily, out of 250,000, that's not so bad, but 70 people who went home and all lived in the area of this one particular ISP, and they directly plugged their machine straight into that cable modem wired it in directly, and off they went thinking that they were protected. And of course, what they did is they pulled a public IP address, and all of a sudden they put their machine out on the public internet. All kinds of fun things like that. Additionally, our typical cyber incidents. So our front door, we get in the neighborhood of 15 million attacks on the front door on a monthly basis. Those numbers have skyrocketed, but the number that really matters isn't the front door attacks, it's the working incidents. So how many incidents does the cybersecurity team, the actual cyber operations center, have to defend against on a day-over-day basis? And those numbers we have seen increase by almost 70% per week over the first 3 weeks of the COVID main crisis. So if you put it around roughly the 10th of March to 15th of March, depending on what state you're in, a couple of states earlier, a couple of states later. But if you aim for that time period right around the middle of March, we were seeing a huge increase in incidents. And what we saw and what we have been seeing is a mass increase in phishing attacks that are directly targeting COVID aspects. We're also seeing attacks specifically against our hospital environments within the state, within the medical environments. And many of those attacks were in the old days in the before COVID era. A lot of those attacks were going after PHI. They were trying to get into HIPAA data. This time around, starting in March, what we saw were attacks that were specifically designed to stop the response of COVID or to disrupt the hospital's network, disrupt services within laboratory environments. We've also seen the same thing to Department of Health websites, not just ours, but multiple states around the country, where Department of Health are coming under attack, Health and Human Services coming under attack. And it's different than it was at one time, where it was always a bad actor attempting to get information, trying to get into intellectual property. This time around, instead of that, it's been very highly connected to creating disruption. And those have been some of the major issues that we've been seeing. Now, the reality is that our cyber team has always been very busy, but in these last 6 weeks, they have been excruciatingly busy. We've had to pull in extra resources to be able to take on a lot of these issues. One of the biggest places that we're seeing hits on would be the K-12 environment. The K-12 environment, for the most part, when you look at schools all across the country, schools seem to come in kind of three grades. You've got the very large schools that are very well funded. You think of the Dallas school districts and the Orange counties and the Minneapolis and the Fargos, where they're very large school districts with thousands and thousands of kids. They're well funded and they have on the ground cyber defense. We have a second grade of schools that are kind of those middle tier schools where you see 25,000 kids in a school district. And those districts seem to be pretty hit and miss. Sometimes they're defending themselves, sometimes they're not. And then we see the vast majority of districts that are all across the country, even in the Californias, the New Yorks, the Floridas, the Texas, North Dakotas. What you'll find is you find lots and lots of districts that are very, very small. And frankly, their cybersecurity person is also a fifth grade teacher who is also coaching basketball at night. And then she also drives one of the school buses. And that person, while she's got a great heart, she's a great teacher, she's probably great at coaching and great at driving the school bus, she doesn't have a lot of time to really understand cybersecurity. And now all of a sudden we've picked up every student in every school and we said, you need to go and have home school and have remote school. What we found is all sorts of problems from a cyber defense standpoint of those devices all over the state of North Dakota. And we've been told again from our peers across the country, issues from all over the nation. So all of this is really to illustrate the threat conversation here. From the best practice standpoint, I would say that depending on the scope of what you are covering, you really need to be able to communicate out these topics. And the horse has left the barn right now, right? We are moving the vast majority of our workforce home. The majority of all of our students are staying at home, at least through this school year. There's not a lot we can do to pull them back in and then enable cyber defense. But what we absolutely should be doing, and in fact, I'm doing this afternoon, I'm sitting down with our governor for a briefing here is we have to start talking about these issues and get them out in the public. Because right now, a lot of my peers, they treat this as they think it's a career limiting issue to talk about the problems that they're having in cybersecurity. But the reality is I can show here from the state of North Dakota the fact that we came out and talked about these problems, talked about nation state actors trying to attack school districts, showing how they're trying to pivot through our National Guard to be able to get to our military bases and other things like that. That demonstration to our legislature and to the public increased my cybersecurity funding by over 300%. That increased our FTEs by 80%. Having those conversations is something that we need and must do as we go forward, especially in the face of the new bills coming out of the federal side for additional IT and technology support for our states and local governments. But with that, I know I'm right around my 10 minutes, and just wanted to frame those threats, frame that best practice. But from a best practice standpoint, please capture those issues and let's make them public. Let's talk about them, because the reality is individually, every one of us is in a lot of trouble. Individually, we are in a lot of trouble. But together, and we start working together and use that, we have an opportunity. We may actually be able to solve this problem. So with that, I will hand over from there. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thanks, Sean. That was a great on-the-ground review, and thank you for your hard work to keep North Dakotans safe and by association, the rest of us. So we really appreciate your hard work in that regard. Next, we're going to go to Ryan Gillis, who is the Vice President for Cybersecurity Strategy and Global Policy with Palo Alto Networks. Ryan, take it away when you're ready.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, Sean, to do this, got a reprieve from the Emergency Operations Center. I was saying before we started, I got a reprieve from teaching my 5-year-old and 4-year-old gym class. So I also appreciate WGA for the break this morning. So by way of quick background, I spent over a decade at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, including at the predecessor organization for CISA that Brian serves under, and at the National Security Council. And over the last 5 years, my remit has been to build relationships with governments at the local, state, federal, and international level. So, I want to appreciate the work that's going on from the partners that are speaking here today, from Governor Burgum all the way down. Sean and his team are truly tremendous. The work coming out of DHS and CISA with Brian and Director Krebs really has been fantastic, and it's an opportunity to take public-private partnership from a theory and a talking point into there are many granular ways that we all need to be working together right now. And so, like states, we, Palo Alto Networks, are balancing both the demands of our own workforce, how to keep our folks safe, how do we transition to a fully remote workforce of 8,000 people in 150 countries around the world, and at the same time, how do you help customers, like, as Sean said, North Dakota, transition thousands and thousands of workers from, at a very basic level, most people were sending their traffic from their offices into a data center, and now everybody's working from home with all of the IoT challenges that presents and the actual network configuration of connecting in a different way, often now through the adoption of cloud and different infrastructure. So internally, we've been focused heavily on our workforce, our hourly employees, those kind of things, and at the same time, helping in critical infrastructure, for example, an energy company take 80,000 workers around the globe to remote over one weekend. Sean talked a little bit about the education challenge and how do you get scale given the diversity and difference of competency and infrastructure and resources of widely varying school districts. So we've partnered with a group called Internet2, which is a technology consortium serving over 100,000 universities and K-12 school systems in the U.S. to help campuses securely deliver remote learning to students at home. So those efforts are intended in many ways to try and get to the scope and scale and give a uniformity of capability to this broad diversity of organizations and educational institutions. The three main areas of collaboration that particularly my part of the organization for Palo Alto Networks is focused on with governments. I would state them not in necessarily priority order, but almost in a Venn diagram of three overlapping circles. One is COVID-19 threat sharing and prevention. Brian talked a great deal about that, some of the trends that we're seeing at the national and international level. The second area is supporting critical functions, critical infrastructure, critical sectors, both because we ourselves are critical infrastructure and the customers that we serve are critical infrastructure. And also developing best practices, standards, capabilities, and delivering technology for scaling secure remote workforces in this environment. So to start on the threat sharing and prevention side, our threat intelligence team produces reports publicly as a matter of course. It's not a sold service. As we have particular COVID-related threats that we are identifying, we share those with government partners like with CISA, like with North Dakota, ahead of time, both to first help them pre-position defenses, make notifications when appropriate to specific sectors, if we're seeing targeting of specific groups, sectors, et cetera, and also to be an amplification chamber because they have such a platform, because they have a user community and a following that they can get the word out, again, to the scope and scale piece. So some of the reports that we've put out just in the last few weeks in close coordination with DHS and others, we've noticed a massive spike in hundreds of thousands of new coronavirus-related domain names. Some of those are legitimate and serving a legitimate function. Some of those are legitimate and being repurposed by bad guys. Some are set up on purpose by malicious actors. And so we're seeing on our level amongst our user community and through our sharing networks, much of the overlap of what Brian talked about as well. Phishing attacks with an email link to a fake Bank of America website that fools users into giving away their login credentials. This, like Brian said, malicious actors regularly use, the holiday season or, large news events as a trigger for phishing attacks. But the unique nature of COVID impacting truly everybody on the globe allows for a proliferation of interest across the entire internet community. We've seen fake web shops offer high demand items supposedly like face masks or hand sanitizers for a discounted price, but in actuality it's to leverage and gain control of the user's computers. Credit card skimmers, scripts on other malicious stores or sometimes on legitimate stores that have been compromised that sell pandemic relevant goods. So you go on to order a new supply of toilet paper for the house, and the bad guys are using that to steal credit card information. Fake ebooks related to COVID-19 that again allows them to deliver malicious payload and gain access. The second area of focus that I mentioned is supporting the critical functions, critical infrastructure, critical sectors. As a veteran of working in the stand-up of DHS right after 9/11 all the way through for over a decade, critical infrastructure and frankly, obviously, given that DHS was born out of 9/11, civil aviation was the number one focus immediately following that. Right now, civil aviation traffic, as we all know, is down 93 to 97% from varying estimates. Right now, the redefinition of what is truly critical, Brian touched on vaccine manufacturers and the intellectual property that ties in many cases back to university institutions that are doing much of this work as well. So back to the school challenge, the full spectrum protection of the food supply chain in terrorist attacks to hurricanes. There's never been, to my knowledge, in the Homeland Security arena in the U.S., this focus on grocery stores and certainly not on takeout restaurants. And we're also seeing some of the pandemic impacts in a health sense on meat processing facilities. So that end-to-end focus and protection on the food supply chain is tremendously important, as is on the health sector. We've seen ransomware attacks, again, as Brian mentioned, in hospitals and on municipalities in large scale and to some great effect over the last decade or so. As hospitals are trying to stand up makeshift ICUs and get PPE to their employees, it's tough to get cyber into that conversation, right? So in one case, for example, we worked with a field hospital that was standing up an ICU in a makeshift way. We just shipped boxes out to them so that they had firewalls on site, which ended up being part of the stand-up that happened just over the weekend. But understanding that definition of critical infrastructure, DHS and CISA, Brian's organization, has been fantastic in trying to understand what is critical. And as I said, then we need to think about how can we prioritize support to those organizations. They've also actually identified some specific entities within critical infrastructure that they see as most critical, and we can look into our customer set. Obviously, we would anonymize anything that goes back, but we've shared nearly 700 malware samples back with DHS, anonymized, but with attack context on parts of that critical infrastructure. And then lastly, developing best practices, standards, and delivering technology and capability for secure workforces. Brian's organization, again, CISA, is now putting out specific product guidelines that says if you're going to use this technology for video teleconferencing or to secure your network, these are the configuration steps that you need to take. We've seen a lot of the bombing into conferences and certainly exploiting some of the educational systems and distance learning. Much of that is folks didn't know how to update, didn't know how to patch, didn't know how to configure things so that you couldn't allow outside individuals to introduce themselves into that. So working with DHS, working with the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, NIST, and with international organizations, we're trying to promote some of those capabilities that folks need to know. And now down to the granular level, if you're using this technology, these are the things that you need to think about so that people can securely leverage those capabilities. And then, again, actually delivering our own capability. We as a company made a tremendous shift towards securing the cloud over the last 2 years, and what we expected as a market trend, and we have seen as a market trend over that time, has obviously flipped the switch night and day into a remote workforce. And how you defend that distributed infrastructure where everybody's logging in from their home ISP and from their home computer and home office or from their garage is just fundamentally different from a technology perspective as well as best practices. And so helping educate our users as our own customer support moves to their garage has been a huge, huge area of focus for us as well. So amongst those three areas, all of which are very much intertwined with the two partners that you hear speaking today, and would love to expand that to what's going on in the individual states and localities. We could work with you and try and build upon a more systemic approach to that rather than having it be one-off and based on personal relationships that we have so far. And with that, let me turn back over the mic.
Great, thanks, Ryan, and thanks for the perspective on how Palo is helping kind of knit together all of these public and private efforts. We really appreciate that. So we've got 20 more minutes, and so we have some time for audience questions. But first, we have a couple discussion questions that we're going to run through. But I encourage any listeners to submit questions, and I'll incorporate them into the conversation. So, Sean, I just want to go back to you, given the fact that you're kind of on the front lines and have been for a few weeks. So are there any, sort of quick fixes that states or governors can take to help defend their various networks, or are there any lessons learned that you've had in the past 6 weeks or so that you'd like to share with other states that may be listening?
Yeah, so we had a bunch of things that we figured out really fast. One of which is actually have an inventory of all your software across the state. That would be awesome. One of the things that we found very quickly is that every agency in the past had the ability to install whatever they chose to. We had a DOT that had a separate soft phone client on. We had to go and remove, 1,200 some of those soft phone clients out for systems. so that we could get proper phones out. The reality is that all the normal best practices of an IT organization, for those governors out there, they need to be practicing those real world items across the board, not just on an agency by agency level. Unified services make this vastly, vastly faster. We have a whole bunch of unified agencies in the state of North Dakota, and then we have some agencies that are in the process of being unified, so they're coming into the shared service. And I can tell you the agencies that were already part of the shared service before, they had the right tech. We could defend them. We could push software to them very, very fast. I mean, we push software out to thousands and thousands of desktops in a matter of a couple of days. But every single agency that wasn't part of unified services had all kinds of complications. So one of the ways that we had to mitigate that, we had to take, for instance, our programming team. We took 50% of all the programmers we have in our state team, and we pushed them over to the help desk. And we had to push all of them into the help desk because we had volumes after sending everybody home. Our volumes were 400% higher than what our previous record was for highest day calls. But you have to be able to adapt. You have to figure out that all the rules go out the window, and you got to find a way to get stuff done. But in the thinking forward, unify those services, get them in the same platforms. You have so much more that we can get done so much faster that way.
Great. Thanks, Sean. All right, for our next question, Ryan, I'm going to start with you, which is just kind of pursuant to the fact that a lot of our nation's critical infrastructure is, either owned or operated by the private sector. And so I'm curious how governors or states can work with various private industry representatives to, kind of strengthen our overall cyber ecosystem. So, Ryan, if you could answer that, and Sean and Brian, feel free to jump in afterwards.
Yeah, I'd start with a similar principle to what Sean just said about knowing your software inventory. You need to, first and foremost, what is your inventory of what truly matters, and taken against the critical infrastructure definition within COVID, right? What do you need to protect most? Which is, it's a risk management approach that the most sophisticated organizations, from a cyber perspective, always have to look at. What matters most, and how do I apply people, process, and technology? I think Sean's a great example of doing that across the state of North Dakota. And in this case, leveraging things like the DHS guidance that has been promulgated, continuing to inform that guidance, working with sector-specific agencies. So if you're a big meat-producing state and you've got a lot of facilities in there, are you energy producing, and what does that look like? Oil and gas is not the same as electricity. Communications, et cetera. So understanding first, on a sectoral basis and down to a critical functions and services basis. How do you identify those organizations, establish a line of communication directly to those entities, and at the same time, how do you leverage third-party organizations such as ourselves, so Palo Alto Networks, protecting those companies and entities, and again, to scope and scale, we are part of a group called the Cyber Threat Alliance, which is peers and competitors across cybersecurity vendors that have started an organization in which we share operational threat information every single day with context. And so we protect 70,000 organizations and companies around the globe. When you take our 5 largest competitors and a full user set, I think, of 25 plus cybersecurity companies that are sharing information to make all of their entities better protected, those are avenues to really sort of move the tide, and also not rely on an individual meatpacking facility in some cases, or an individual hospital or hospital system to be able to take those steps on their own. If you can get it out to those that are charged with the protection of those entities at a larger scale basis, it cuts out some of the middleman requirement, and it cuts out the dependency on each individual organization and institution to be able to defend itself.
Hey, I just want to add real briefly, this is Brian from CISA. In each of your states, well, in each of the regions, we have a regional director, and in each of your states, we have a cybersecurity advisor. And then my counterparts in DHS also have representatives in the fusion centers in the states. A big part of their job is to coordinate our CISA resources and cyber capabilities to state and local organizations. That's why they're in those regions, but also to the critical infrastructure providers, owners, and operators that are in your jurisdictions. And so, that's their role, is to be the to really know what's happening in this case the western states, but also to make you aware of the kind of capabilities we have. I also wanted to draw your attention, and you've probably all seen it in some form, but on the CISA website is the critical infrastructure workers guidance. And as my colleague kind of mentioned before, what we thought about as critical infrastructure before COVID, were things like electrical and telecommunications and energy and so forth, and they still are, absolutely. But we've learned about a number of other things that are critical right now, like grocery stores and PPE manufacturers, and sometimes it's even precursor chemicals and so forth. So the critical infrastructure workers guidance that we have on the website kind of lays out where we think those critical infrastructure are now in this kind of COVID environment. Most states and localities have used that guidance in whole or in part to form their state and local guidance on who can go to work and who should be staying at home. But I also want you to look at the guidance, not just from who gets to go to work and who gets to stay at home, which is certainly one of its intentions, and that's the way that governors and others have used that. But I also want you to look at it and say, okay, these are the kinds of companies that we may not have thought about before as a priority for cybersecurity outreach or cybersecurity services, but man, they sure are in this period of time. And it may be because what they do is inherently technology-based, and so they have a lot of cyber dependency, or it may be that it's an industry sector that traditionally kind of underinvests in cybersecurity, but in these times they're going to rely on it to deliver the products and services that are critical to our response. And so I want to let you know that we at CISA are following that guidance to reach out to industry and to offer our services, and we're developing products for them and information so that they kind of understand the risks that they face. But I'm way over here in the Beltway, and I'm probably not as effective a voice at getting as communicating to those businesses as you will be in your region. And so just want to call your attention to that, not just the product, but kind of that thought process of saying, you know what, let's take a look at it here, and let's do some cyber outreach. Again, the service that I mentioned before, our cyber hygiene service, would be one that would be very appropriate for those kinds of businesses. And again, you can just have them email to vulnerability@cisa.dhs.gov, and we'll get them right on to the service.
Outstanding. Thanks, Brian. And WJ is happy to promote the SaiHi service with our members. I think that sounds like a really great tool that some of our states can take advantage of. And Brian, for this next one, I'm going to stick with you just because there's been a handful of mentions of challenges to our food supply chains. And has that been an area that's already receiving a number of cyber attacks? I think all of us have heard about, the outbreaks within meat processing workers and that sort of thing. But is that a focal area for some of these attacks?
Well, so let me say it like this. I don't know if you said Ryan or Brian, I think, but you did say stick with me, so I'm going to take it anyway. We are very focused on supply chains that are critical. So one of the things that you're probably all tracking is that when things become a level of national crisis, then FEMA becomes the the response agency. So FEMA is part of the Department of Homeland Security. It's one of my sister agencies. And underneath FEMA are a series of what they call ESFs, so emergency support functions. ESF 14 is run by CISA, and that is it's essentially the critical infrastructure engagement emergency support function. So how do we engage with industry to respond? And in normal FEMA scenarios where those are hurricanes or whatever, that industry might be, how do we engage with the shipping and transportation firms or whatever so that they're moving supplies in the right way? In these days, the ESF functions that we're looking at are very much around PPE supply, food supply, certain chemical supplies, and those are things that inside of CISA we're doing a lot of analysis around those. To get to the specifics of your question, the risks that we're seeing now and the food supply are not particularly cyber risks. They're just they're virus risks and they're cross-border kind of either immigration or shipping delays that are associated with the virus. So nothing that is specifically targeting that industry, but I will say that sometimes, and we just had some incidents last week where actors were targeting large service providers. So these are, when I say service provider in this context, we usually say a managed service provider. So they're providing a software service that many companies or many industries might be using, and unwittingly, the adversary is targeting that service provider, but it may impact someone in education or in healthcare or in food supply. So the risks are still there, but I'm not aware of or tracking any specific targeting of the food supply.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's good to know. Going to change gears a little bit back to the education realm, and Sean, we'll start with you, and then others I'd encourage you to jump in. Are there any kind of actions that either North Dakota or other states are doing in the event that schools are going to be doing digital learning in the fall after summer break? Are there any kind of practices that you're looking at or resources that you're taking advantage of in preparation for that possible outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been standing up systems since early March to be able to enable all of these schools to be able to do distance learning. We took about 4 days to be able to stand up a system that we were able to get about 120,000 kids into. And then since then, we've been refining and expanding that system to be able to get to mostly schools that just had no technology before, no capacity to be able to do remote learning previously. And with that, we do have an expectation that remote learning is going to become somewhat of a staple in the future, regardless of our situation with COVID. The reality is that even if we have an inoculation tomorrow, which we won't, but even if we did, there's still a long tail to be able to get that inoculation out to the people everywhere. The reality is that we're looking at a pretty long tail operationally to be able to get to the point where we can, quote unquote, work in this new normal. So with that, there is a high likelihood that we're going to have to continue to work in a highly telework, highly remote environment across all government services. And so we are definitely expanding the technology available for education, as well as basically everything else in government right now. The IT teams have never been busier ever. It's just an amazing amount of stuff that's coming in, because we simply can't deliver services the way we used to before COVID.
Great, thanks, Sean. Either Ryan or Brian, do you have anything to add there?
This is Ryan.
Great.
Totally,
go for
totally
it.
agree. Yeah, we expect the same thing. This is fundamentally going to change how people both continue to work and continue to learn. And so I think I've mentioned we're working on both the individual school system level, and so how do you specifically deliver technology and services to, for example, a Midwestern urban school district that went 26,000 remote schools overnight and over a weekend, and then partnerships like Internet 2 that get to 100,000 institutions around the country, so that you don't have to, again, rely upon the resources and capability to be inherent within one school district when it can be so varied.
Great, thanks, Ryan. All right, well, we only have a couple more minutes, so I want to ask one final question I have here, which is just, is there any way that the Western Governors Association can help kind of create a stronger, cyber ecosystem out here in the Western states? Is there anything that we can be doing in terms of encouraging our states to adopt similar practices or, kind of security practices across state borders? And I'll just let whoever wants to jump in answer that first.
Yeah, this is John. I'll take that on. So we announced last year the formation of a multi-state cyber defense organization, and that multi-state cyber defense has evolved into multiple state SOCs. States being able to have resources that can defend each other. We've built this to be very much an environment where we can start to lend each other resources as necessary, be able to support each other's technology as necessary. If you have an emergency in your state where you can pull a cord and other states can show up with resources and know your environment and know some of the tech in your environment to be able to help you. So that's something that has been critical to what we have been designing here. And we have multiple states right now that are actually in that process, but it's something that we'd love to see an expansion of that capability, and doesn't have to be in just one environment for all Western states. If there's 5 of them, there's 5 of them. I don't care. But the reality is that, again, I go back to none of our states have the comprehensive resources to be able to defend ourselves the way that we should be defending ourselves. Everybody is always scratching for cybersecurity dollars. And the reality is that we are every single day in competition with every private sector company who's hiring cyber resources. And guess what? They pay better than we do. And a lot of times the tech that they're bringing in is more entertaining. So it's very hard to keep those staff. We have to think differently about how we defend ourselves and each other. And I would love to see Western Governors help us to really continue to push a multi-state SOC, multi-state defense organization.
Hey, this is
Outstanding.
Ryan.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I'd echo Sean's sentiments there. We're fully supportive of the multi-state SOC approach. There's possibly even an opportunity to expand the partnership too, so that DHS has greater visibility into, right now what you're looking at is the Albert system with intrusion detection that's signature-based, rather than a greater visibility and greater enforcement capability, stronger operational partnerships across the state that I think Sean is spearheading, and then sort of zooming out and back to the 3 areas of collaboration that I mentioned earlier. If there are, if your state SOC or Cyber Center, if there's an opportunity to start sharing operational threat information right now, happy to do so. Happy to figure out a way to target that towards providing security services and threat intel targeted around critical infrastructure that matters most in the state. And similarly on the best practices piece, just sort of working through what we've seen as a best practice use case for transitioning a school district. Can we apply what North Dakota has learned more broadly? I think those use cases are very helpful as everybody's sort of scrambling to adjust to this new threat surface and operational environment.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Well, I think that takes us up to the end of the hour, and I just want to thank all 3 of you for your time participating and all the good work that you're doing to help our schools and infrastructure and jobs keep rolling. So thank you very, very much. Also like to thank our listeners today. If you'd like to share this webinar with any colleagues or folks who may be interested in listening in, we'll have this posted on WJ's website later today. And with that, we're going to close out. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.